June 6, 1944. The morning broke grey and uncertain, as if the sky itself hesitated to acknowledge the day. Somewhere in the distance, over the hills of Normandy, the low rumble of distant artillery rolled like an ominous tide. In our camp near Lisieux, we waited, not with readiness, but with a taut, restless tension that seeped into every corner of our cramped outpost. The radio operator cursed softly under his breath, his headset crackling with static. Fragments of hurried German and broken transmissions floated through the air, but no clear orders came. Some of the men paced like caged animals, their boots scuffing the dirt in restless patterns. Others lounged against the armoured half-tracks, smoking thin cigarettes and watching the horizon with hollow eyes. I sat on a low wooden crate, cradling my rifle, my stomach twisting in uneasy knots. We had heard rumours of an invasion for months, whispers of a storm gathering across the Channel, and yet the Wehrmacht's high command seemed paralysed, as if unable to believe the inevitable had come. Word began trickling through the ranks that the Allies had landed, though nobody knew exactly where. Some claimed it was Calais, others muttered about Cherbourg. The truth remained maddeningly elusive, a spectre that taunted us, just out of reach. The stillness around the camp was a lie. The air itself felt alive, electric with the kind of charge that only comes before catastrophe. "You think they'll come here?" one of the younger soldiers asked, his voice barely masking the tremor beneath. His name was Klaus, fresh-faced, barely 19, and still clutching his rifle like it might ward off his fear. "They'll go where the defences are weakest," I said, not bothering to look up. "That's not here." It was a lie, of course. Every inch of this cursed coast was weak. We all knew it, though none of us dared say it aloud. An older sergeant barked at Klaus to shut up and stand his post. The boy snapped to attention, but I could see the fear in his eyes. It was the same fear that gnawed at all of us, though we tried to bury it under layers of steel and duty. The hours dragged. Noon came and went without incident, the sun burning through the haze to reveal a bright but pitiless sky. Lunch was a meagre affair, cold rations and tepid coffee that tasted more like mud than caffeine. It felt obscene to eat when something monumental was unfolding just beyond our reach, yet hunger was a force that even war couldn't suppress. At some point the lieutenant emerged from the command tent, his face grim. He gathered a few of the senior men and spoke in hushed tones, his hands moving in sharp, agitated gestures. From where I sat, I couldn't make out the words, but their body language said everything. Confusion, frustration, and the unmistakable edge of panic. Around me, the men began to mutter. "What the hell's taking so long?" a grizzled corporal growled. "If the Tommies have landed, we should be moving, not sitting here with our thumbs up our orders will come," another interrupted, though his tone lacked conviction. "They always do." I bit back a bitter laugh. Orders, as if that would make a difference now. By mid-afternoon, the first real confirmation reached us. The Allies had landed. Not at Calais or Cherbourg, but somewhere near Caen. The scale of the invasion was staggering. Over 1,000 ships, they said, and thousands more planes. I struggled to picture it in my mind. An armada stretching across the horizon, soldiers pouring onto the beaches in endless waves. It sounded more like the stuff of nightmares than reality. Still, the command hesitated. Rumours spread of paratroopers dropped behind our lines, of saboteurs and decoys meant to sow chaos. The High Command ordered half our division to investigate a supposed parachute landing near Lisieux. The rest of us were left in limbo, waiting for orders that never seemed to come. As the afternoon wore on, the tension reached a breaking point. Some of the men began sharpening their bayonets or checking their weapons for the 5th, 6th, or 7th time. Others simply stared at the sky, as if expecting the enemy to fall from the heavens. For my part, I couldn't shake the gnawing sense of futility. We were cogs in a vast, grinding machine, our lives dictated by decisions made in distant rooms by men who would never set foot on a battlefield. I thought of my parents back home, of the small village where I'd grown up. When I'd left at 18, I'd been full of fire and pride, ready to defend the fatherland. Now, 2 years later, That fire had dwindled to embers. "Do you think it's true?" Klaus whispered beside me. "That's the biggest invasion in history." I glanced at him, his boyish face shadowed with worry. I didn't have the heart to lie this time. "Yes," I said quietly, "I think it is." He nodded, his expression unreadable, and we fell silent. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the lieutenant finally called us to assemble. The radio had crackled to life with new orders. We were to mobilize immediately, heading south toward Evrisy. The invasion was real, and it was massive. But as we scrambled to load our gear and climb into the waiting half-tracks, one thought lingered in my mind, unspoken but heavy as stone. We should have been moving hours ago. Chapter 2. Orders too late. The order came at 14:30, hours after the first Allied boots had touched the beaches. By then the chaos was already in motion, spiraling far beyond the reach of a single division, but orders were orders, and we moved. The camp erupted into a frenzy of activity, soldiers scrambling to gather their equipment, vehicles roaring to life amid shouted commands and the acrid tang of exhaust. I climbed into the back of a half-track with a dozen other men, each of us silent, lost in our thoughts as the vehicle lurched forward. The convoy snaked through the countryside, an endless line of armored carriers, trucks and tanks rumbling along narrow roads. Somewhere up ahead, I could hear the distinct growl of panthers, their engines straining under the weight of their hulking frames. For a time, the rhythm of the convoy, steady, mechanical, lulled us into a false sense of order. The fields rolled by in muted greens and yellows, dotted with clusters of trees and the occasional farmhouse. It was almost peaceful, if you ignored the warplanes circling in the distance like vultures. "Do you hear that?" one of the men asked, his voice cutting through the monotony. We all listened, straining to catch the sound. It came a moment later, faint but unmistakable, the high-pitched whine of approaching aircraft. "Enemy planes!" someone shouted, and the half-track skidded to a halt. We piled out in a chaotic rush, diving for cover as the first streaks of silver appeared in the sky. Typhoons and P-51 Mustangs, their wings glinting in the afternoon sun, swooped down on the convoy like hawks on prey. The first pass was deafening. Machine guns chattered, tearing into vehicles and men with ruthless efficiency. I pressed myself into the dirt, my heart pounding in my chest, as explosions erupted all around. The half-track I had just vacated erupted in flames, its fuel tank igniting with a roar that sent a column of black smoke spiraling into the sky. "Stay down!" someone yelled, though it was hardly necessary. The ground seemed the only safe place left in the world. The air was filled with the cacophony of war, the shriek of diving planes, the thunder of anti-aircraft guns, the screams of wounded men. I dared to lift my head and saw a truck ahead of us take a direct hit, its contents, ammunition by the sound of it, detonating in a fiery burst. The German hell, on the other side of the Port Elephant, we fired back, of course, though it felt like a futile gesture. The Luftwaffe was nowhere to be seen, and our own guns struggled to track the agile enemy planes. I watched as a Typhoon veered sharply, narrowly avoiding a burst of flak, before leveling out and unleashing another deadly strafing run. "Where's our air support?" a corporal shouted, his voice rising in panic. "Probably still on the ground," someone muttered bitterly. It was over in minutes, though it felt like hours. When the planes finally peeled away, vanishing into the horizon, they left behind a scene of devastation. Several vehicles were burning, their metal frames twisted and charred. Bodies lay scattered along the road, some motionless, others writhing in agony. "Get up! Move!" The lieutenant's voice jolted us back to reality. Those of us still standing scrambled to our feet, hauling the wounded onto makeshift stretchers and dragging them to whatever vehicles remained functional. The convoy reassembled in grim silence, its pace now slower, more cautious. As we rolled forward, the full scope of the destruction became clear. Fuel trucks had been targeted with precision, their loss leaving us critically short on supplies. The Panthers ahead of us were already running low, and the men whispered anxiously about how far we could get before grinding to a halt. I stared out at the countryside, trying to shake the image of the burning half-track from my mind. The fields no longer seemed peaceful. They were too quiet, too empty, as if the land itself had retreated in fear of the storm that was coming. By the time we reached the Orne River, The sun was dipping low on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and red. It was here that the real problem revealed itself. The Panther Battalion had run out of fuel. "Out of fuel?" one of the sergeants barked, his voice incredulous. "How the hell are we supposed to fight without tanks?" The officers conferred in low tones, their faces set in grim lines. Meanwhile, the rest of us milled about, trying to make sense of the situation. Some of the men siphoned fuel from smaller vehicles to keep the Panthers operational, but it was a losing battle. "Bust the planes, now this," a soldier muttered beside me. "What's next? No ammunition?" As darkness fell, we pressed on, though our pace had slowed to a crawl. The night was cold, and the air seemed to vibrate with the distant echoes of artillery fire. I leaned back against the side of the half-track, my rifle resting across my knees,